George Parkman, born February 19, 1790, was a prominent Boston Brahmin, hailing from one of the city's wealthiest families. Known for his daily walks through Boston's streets to collect rents, being frugal, he did not own a horse. Parkman was a tall, lean man with a distinctive protruding chin, often seen wearing a top hat. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sir remarked that he abstained while others indulged, he walked while others rode, he worked while others slept. In 1849, Parkman's worth was approximately $500,000. John Webster, born May 20, 1793, was a lecturer at the newly established Harvard Medical College. Described by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sir as pleasant in the lecture room, rather nervous and excitable, Webster's classes often featured demonstrations of the latest chemical discoveries. George F. Hoare noted that while Webster's lectures could be tedious for non-chemistry majors, he was affectionately known as Skyrocket Jack due to his enthusiasm for fireworks, particularly during President Everett's inauguration. Webster's classroom demonstrations were often enhanced with pyrotechnic elements, leading to a warning from the president of Harvard about their potential danger. Despite his academic reputation, Webster faced significant financial difficulties. His family had to relinquish a mansion in Cambridge and were leasing a respectable, though modest, house by 1849. Deep in debt to several friends, Webster's salary and lecture fees were insufficient to cover his expenses. Ephraim Littlefield, a swamp Yankee of rural origins, served as the janitor at Harvard Medical College, which was built in 1846. He had also been the janitor at a previous medical school since 1842. Littlefield and his wife, Caroline, resided in the college's basement next to Webster's laboratory. He was well acquainted with Webster and the other Harvard doctors, often observing their medical studies, including cadaver dissection for anatomy lessons. As the janitor, Littlefield was responsible for cleaning the doctors' rooms and laboratories, starting their fires, preparing specimens for lectures, and performing various other tasks as requested. On November 22, 1849, a week before Thanksgiving, George Parkman went to Cambridge to find John Webster and asked Mr. Peedy, the Harvard cashier, to give him the money from the sale of Webster's lecture tickets to settle Webster's debt. The following day, November 23rd, Parkman was out collecting debts as usual. Webster visited Parkman's home that morning and suggested they meet at the medical college at 1:30 p.m. At 1:45 p.m., Parkman was last seen entering the college on North Grove Street, dressed in a dark frock coat, dark trousers, a purple satin vest, and a stovepipe hat. Later that afternoon, Ephraim Littlefield found Webster's room locked from the inside and heard water running. Webster returned around 6 p.m. and attended a party at the Treadwell's house, showing no signs of distress. On November 24th, the Parkman family became worried and contacted the police. That same day, Littlefield saw Webster with a bundle and was asked by Webster to make a fire. On November 25th, Webster appeared outside the college and met Parkman's nephew, James Henry Blake, and police officer Trenholm. They asked him if he had seen Parkman. That afternoon, Webster also visited Parkman's brother, Reverend Francis Parkman, informing him and his family that he had met the missing man after receiving $483 to pay a debt installment. Webster said Parkman promised to immediately have the payment recorded by the city clerk to clear the debt. Webster then left without inquiring further about the search. On November 26, with a $3,000 reward announced for finding George Parkman alive, his family printed, posted, and distributed 28,000 copies of a wanted notice. Later, a $1,000 reward was offered for his body. On November 27th, John Webster worked at the college in the evening. The city was abuzz with speculation, fueled by its 120 periodicals. Some believed Parkman had left the city, while others thought he had been attacked for the money he always carried. City Marshal Francis Tukey had the Charles River and Boston Harbor dragged for a body and sent men to neighboring towns to investigate. Search parties were formed, working day and night. Police searched Parkman's building, both rented and vacant, and even abandoned properties he didn't own. Officers Derastus Clapp and others from Tukey's newly formed professional police force searched Webster's rooms, placing special emphasis on the laboratories and dissecting vaults, but found no evidence of Parkman. Ephraim Littlefield grew nervous as suspicion began to link him to the disappearance, especially since Webster was behaving oddly. A few days after the disappearance, the two men met in the street, and Webster asked Littlefield if he had seen Parkman at the college the previous week. When Littlefield confirmed he had seen Parkman on Friday around 1:30, Webster struck his cane on the ground and questioned him further about seeing Parkman elsewhere in the building or in his lecture room. Littlefield denied these, and Webster reiterated his story about paying off the debt before walking off, having said more to Littlefield in that encounter than ever before. Littlefield recalled that 4 days before the disappearance, Webster had asked him several questions about the dissecting vault. After the college had been searched, Webster surprised Littlefield with the turkey for Thanksgiving, the first gift he had ever given him. On November 28th, Webster arrived at the college early. Littlefield watched him under the door, seeing as far as his knees. Webster moved from the furnace to the fuel closet and back, making 8 trips. Later, the furnace burned so intensely that the wall on the other side became hot to the touch. When Webster left, Littlefield entered the room through a window, finding the doors bolted. He discovered nearly empty kindling barrels, though they had recently been filled, and wet spots that tasted like acid in unusual places. On November 29th, which was Thanksgiving, Littlefield borrowed a hatchet, drill, crowbar, and mortar chisel. With his wife standing guard, he began chiseling away at the wall under Webster's private lab privy. He tunneled into the vault where the wall had felt hot, hacking at the spot where the privy emptied into a pit that the police hadn't searched. After breaking through 2 layers of brick in just over an hour, he paused to attend a dance, leaving the remaining layers for the next day. On November 30th, Ephraim Littlefield resumed chiseling and worked until he managed to punch a hole in the wall. A strong draft extinguished his lantern, so he maneuvered it to look around, ignoring the foul fumes. As his eyes adjusted to the dark, he finally saw something unusual. Narrowing his eyes, he focused until he could make out the shape of a human pelvis on top of a dirt mound. He also saw a dismembered thigh and lower part of a leg. Littlefield exited his excavation and ran to the home of another professor, Jacob Bigelow, who then found Marshal Tukey. By the time Tukey arrived, word had spread, and a group of men awaited the official report on the bone's identity. Tukey first had Littlefield inventory the specimens in the dissection room to ensure none were missing. Then, several men entered the tunnel and approached the vault. They decided the man with the longest arms would enter the privy and hand out the remains. He handed out the pelvis, the right thigh, and the lower left leg, which were placed on a board to await the coroner, Jabez Pratt. After this, Marshal Tukey dispatched Officer Clapp and 2 other constables to arrest Webster at his home in Cambridge. Without initially informing him of the arrest, they took him to jail on a charge of murder. Webster initially denied knowledge of the crime. When told what Littlefield had found, he exclaimed, "That villain, I am a ruined man," blaming the janitor and mentioning that only the 2 of them had access to the privy. He then fell silent, trembling and sweating in his cell. He ingested what he later admitted was strychnine, but it only made him ill. Meanwhile, investigators searched for the rest of Parkman's body. Littlefield pointed out a bone fragment he had found in a furnace in Webster's laboratory and showed it to the marshal. A full search of the toilet area was conducted, with Webster brought in from jail to observe. While officers and the coroner were searching, Littlefield showed them a piece of the furnace he had broken off, which had a piece of bone fused to it. They insisted he put it back where he found it. Webster watched silently as the parts already discovered were laid out, then he was taken back to jail. On December 1st, a coroner's jury was assembled to make a judgment about the case. Before they were let in, the coroner and marshal's men examined a sink that appeared to be recently gouged in several places, strange acid stains on the floor and steps, and the contents of the furnace, from which they extracted a button, some coins, and more bone fragments, including a jawbone with teeth. They then opened a chest that emitted a foul odor, revealing an armless, headless, hairy, and partially burned torso. They determined that the head had been sawn off and found a saw nearby. Inside the torso, they discovered a thigh, with the heart and other organs missing. Miss Parkman identified the body as her husband's based on markings near the penis and on the lower back. His brother-in-law confirmed the identification by the extreme hairiness of Parkman's body. Subsequent searches revealed bloody clothing belonging to Webster and the right kidney. Tests showed the stains to be copper nitrate, a substance effective for removing blood, and Jeffries Wyman identified the bone fragments. The medical college's facilities allowed for a thorough examination of the body parts. They conjectured that a hole found under the left breast might have been the stab that killed the victim, though it did not resemble a wound and there was no blood. By the end of the day, they estimated the man's height to have been 5 feet 10 inches, matching George Parkman. On January 26, 1850, John Webster was indicted for murder. Awaiting trial, Webster wrote a detailed 194-page defense. The inquest jury decided that the body parts found were indeed those of George Parkman, concluding that he had been killed and dismembered at the medical college, holding Webster responsible. The grand jury indicted Webster based on these findings, believing he had assaulted and killed Parkman. Webster chose Harvard graduates Edward Dexter Sawyer and Pliny T. Merrick as his attorneys. Sawyer, inexperienced in criminal law, provided a weak defense, while Merrick held a secondary role. Webster did not strategize with them, but handed over his notes, which suggested that Littlefield, the janitor, may have perjured himself. Neither attorney cross-examined Littlefield thoroughly or emphasized his proximity to the lab and potential motives. The trial began on March 19, 1850, presided over by Chief Justice Lemuel Shaw of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. It lasted 12 days, attracting 60,000 spectators and journalists from London, Paris, and Berlin. Webster pleaded not guilty, and a jury was quickly impaneled. The prosecution, led by Massachusetts Attorney General John Clifford and George Bemis, presented a strong case. Clifford's opening statements laid out the facts and evidence, and Bemis examined witnesses who doubted they would recognize Parkman's body. The jury visited the crime scene, including the privy pit. Witnesses testified about the medical evidence and Webster's odd behavior. The coroner described Webster as mad after his arrest. Anatomist Jeffrey Wyman and dentist Nathan Cooley Keep identified the remains as Parkman's, with Keep's dental work providing key evidence. Ephraim Littlefield, the janitor, testified about Webster's suspicious behavior and his own discovery of the body parts. The defense accused him of seeking the reward, but did not suggest he was the murderer. Littlefield's testimony was considered credible. The court heard about Webster's financial troubles and doubts about his repayment claim. Police described finding the torso in a tea chest and other body parts fitting in the privy hole. Letters attempting to mislead the investigation were linked to Webster. The defense argued that the prosecution had not proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Webster was the killer, bringing forth character witnesses and suggesting sightings of Parkman after his disappearance. They questioned the identification of the remains and the cause of death. After lengthy arguments from both sides, including a 6-hour speech from the defense, the jury deliberated and found Webster guilty of deliberate murder. He reacted with visible distress. On April 1st, Chief Justice Shaw sentenced Webster to be hanged. Public reactions were divided, with some believing in his guilt and others doubting the sufficiency of the evidence. On May 4th, Webster's lawyers submitted a petition for a writ of error against Judge Shaw and his instructions to the jury. The hearing, held on June 12th before Shaw and his 4 associates, resulted in the writ being denied. Webster then appealed to Governor George N. Briggs for a pardon, maintaining his innocence. Briggs, a lay preacher, resisted the strong pressure from the Brahmin elite who favored commutation. Additionally, the previous year, Washington Good, a black sailor, had been hanged for the murder of another black sailor based on circumstantial evidence. Pardoning Webster after Good's execution would have damaged Briggs' reputation. Governor Briggs signed the death warrant. In June, Webster penned a confession in which he admitted to killing Parkman in self-defense during a heated confrontation over the debt. He characterized the act as an impulsive reaction rather than a premeditated murder, describing Parkman as speaking and gesticulating in the most violent and menacing manner. In his rage, Webster recounted, "I seized whatever was at hand, a stick of wood, and I struck him with all the force of my passion. It was a blow to the side of his head, with no object to soften the impact. He fell immediately to the ground, motionless. There was no second blow." He also confessed to writing an anonymous letter. Despite renewed appeals for clemency, the governor and council remained steadfast, and Webster's sentence was carried out. On August 30th, 1850, he was executed publicly at Boston's Leverett Street Jail, dying within 4 minutes. He was buried at Copp's Hill Burying Ground.